Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are tackling, well, one of the most significant and, frankly, demanding career shifts in modern business leadership today. So let me just start with this question. Why is it that some chief information officers, CIOs, they get that seat at the strategy table, they're central figures, while others, well, they're still kind of seen as just the people keeping the servers humming?
Yeah, that question, it really cuts right to the heart of it, doesn't it? It's the core challenge, I think, for pretty much every IT professional who's aiming for the C-suite. We are definitely decisively moving past that old era where the tech exec was just the keeper of the lights. The future CIO has to be so much more a strategic visionary, yeah, but also an agile innovator and, crucially, a master of influence, navigating the organization. Diplomacy, really.
And today, we've synthesized quite a bit of research to try and provide a blueprint for making that shift. This deep dive, it's built from recent executive research, looking specifically at CIO leadership studies, competency,
And the actual experiences, right? We're looking at senior IT executives who've successfully handled those really complex multi-million-dollar projects. And importantly, managed the crushing weight of diverse, often competing stakeholder demands.
We're really trying to get granular here.
Exactly. We've analyzed survey findings, hundreds of CIOs talking about the skills they think are most important. And we've juxtaposed that with qualitative case studies looking at how top IT directors manage the, let's be honest, tricky political and organizational dynamics in big multinational companies. Our mission today is really to distill those foundational competencies that lift tech professionals into true C-suite influencers, strategic influencers.
I think the narrative context we've got from the adventures of an IT leader really captures the anxiety around this. Just imagine stepping into a new CIO role. Let's call him Barton, like in the book, and you immediately feel that immense pressure. You're inheriting, well, a disaster, basically. Constant outages, a history of failed projects.
And a management team that's just completely fed up.
Exactly. Fed up with the technical drama. And Barton, he realizes super quickly, it's not just about technical know-how anymore. He needs leadership. He needs strategy. He needs political skill, that acumen.
Yeah.
That shift, from technical manager to strategic maestro, that's exactly what we're digging into today.
And that anxiety is so real because, look, the technical foundation, that's assumed. You wouldn't even get the interview for the CIO job if you didn't have that baseline. But the strategic execution, aligning the culture, managing stakeholders effectively, that's where careers are really made or broken at that level.
So if you, listening right now, are charting your course towards that C-suite, maybe you're looking to level up your leadership mindset in tech, wanting to understand what's expected of the next generation of IT execs. Definitely follow this deep dive. And maybe share it with someone you know who's feeling that heat from the boardroom right now. We're really trying to lay out the non-technical blueprint for success here. Okay, so let's start by maybe looking back a bit. We need to appreciate the journey this role has taken. Historically, way back before the 1980s, the information systems manager, they were largely just handling a service function, right? Almost purely operational.
That's a really crucial starting point because around 1981, we saw this first big inflection point documented. The IS manager role was already starting to shift away from being just a technician. They were moving towards being more like a general manager, maybe at the vice presidential level. They were kind of forced to spend less time on the day-to-day ops and more time on higher level stuff. Strategic planning for IS, managing people issues. It was a recognition, really, that technology was having a much bigger impact on the organization.
And then, by the early 90s, the literature seems to confirm that the CIO role had really solidified as being fundamentally executive.
Yeah.
They were explicitly tasked with being that bridge, right? That critical link between the tech capabilities and the rest of this business functional areas, commercial, even external entities.
Yeah, and success factors back then weren't just about keeping the systems up. It included things like, peer acceptance at the executive level. Did the other VPs see you as an equal? And did you have the authority to actually allocate resources strategically across the whole business?
Fast forward to today, though, and that mandate, it's pushed even beyond just being a bridge function, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The dominant view now is crystal clear. The CIO is, first and foremost, a business leader. Their expertise just happens to be technologer. It's not the other way around, not a tech specialist who happens to run a department. And the competencies seen as most critical for success, they're overwhelmingly non-technical. Things like leadership, having an organizational vision, strategic thinking, proactively building relationships, diplomacy.
But hang on, let's circle back to that cautionary tale we touched on earlier, because I think it needs a bit more unpacking. If the goal is all strategy and diplomacy, what happens to the really strong technical leader who gets promoted to CIO? Isn't there a risk they focus so much on the business side, they actually lose touch, maybe lose the respect of the tech teams they're supposed to lead?
That's a really important tension, and it explains that cautionary tale perfectly. Often, IT managers who get promoted to CIO fail precisely because they fall into what we might call the competency trap. They keep relying on the technical skills that got them the promotion in the first
The
place.
skills they're comfortable with.
Exactly, the skills they know. And they neglect developing those crucial executive leadership skills that the CIO job actually requires. They essentially hit the ceiling of their technical expertise, and believe me, their teams sense it when their leader is overwhelmed by the strategic demands.
Okay. So it's not saying you shouldn't understand the technology. That's crucial. But your job fundamentally shifts. You're not the main doer or the fixer anymore. You're the visionary, the enabler, the person who can effectively translate and communicate the value of what the technical teams are doing to the C-suite.
Precisely. You absolutely need technical fluency. You need to be able to assess emerging tech, challenge your team's assumptions, ask the right questions. But your primary focus, where you spend your time and energy, has to shift to things like organizational development, managing change, and those really high-stakes communication challenges.
And this evolution, it's not slowing down, is it? It feels like it's accelerating. We've moved beyond that sort of classic strategist bridge function into something people are calling CIO 4.0.
Yeah.
What really defines this new era?
CIO 4.0 puts business transformation and innovation right at the absolute core. This isn't a maintenance role anymore. It's about being a proactive agent of change. And honestly, it's fundamentally being driven by the explosive growth of technologies like, well, generative AI is the obvious one right now. The modern CIO has to anticipate and adapt to continuous, often disruptive change. They need to position themselves as that strategic visionary, but also as a responsible steward of transformation.
Okay, let's get specific about that stewardship piece.
Hmm.
When we talk about the AI era, what are, say, 3 or 4 really concrete focus areas that define what a modern CIO needs to be worrying about strategically?
Okay, first and foremost, I'd say is integrating responsible AI frameworks. This is absolutely critical now. It's about putting ethics into operation, really. I mean, the CIO has to actively design systems and processes to make sure algorithms are transparent, that the decision-making can be audited, and critically, that the training data is unbiased and diverse, promoting fairness and equity.
Can you give us a tangible example? Like, what does that actually look like on a CIO's desk day to day? Is it just writing a policy document?
Oh, far from it. It means setting criteria for choosing tools that explicitly include these governance requirements. It means demanding mandatory human oversight points in automated systems, especially if they're dealing with sensitive areas like hiring or lending or customer profiling. So imagine a CIO implementing a new AI-driven marketing personalization tool. Their framework must mandate regular audits to check for and prevent demographic or behavioral bias that might, say, unfairly exclude certain customer groups. The CIO effectively becomes the chief conscience on deploying this powerful new tech.
Wow, that really does raise the stakes significantly. Okay, what's the second major focus area then?
Secondly, they're increasingly the drivers of green IT and integrating sustainability. This takes the conversation beyond just saving money on energy bills towards genuine corporate social responsibility. We're talking about tangible things like optimizing how data centers are cooled, implementing policies for buying energy-efficient hardware, maybe even shifting cloud workloads around based on the carbon intensity of regional power grids at different times. The IT strategy has to visibly align with and actively contribute to the company's broader sustainability goals.
So they're connecting IT investments directly to those ESG, environmental, social governance metrics that investors and customers care more and more about.
Exactly. And third, even with all this pressure for speed and innovation, the CIO must establish really robust governance structures. Because the risks are escalating to sophisticated cybersecurity threats, massive data privacy compliance burdens like GDPR or CCPA. As datasets get huge and interconnected through AI tools, the potential attack surface just expands exponentially. This demands proactive strategic foresight. Investing now in things like quantum computing preparedness or advanced security for edge computing, not waiting until it's too late.
Right, you can't just react anymore. But to pull off these huge strategic shifts, successfully, responsible AI, green IT, next-gen governance, you've got to have complete buy-in at the very top, right?
That is the absolute non-negotiable factor, CEO-CIO alignment. Our research consistently confirms that improved alignment between the CEO and the CIO is utterly crucial for catalyzing strategic decisions, particularly around major investments like large-scale AI adoption. If the CEO and the CIO aren't singing from the same hymn sheet, speaking with a single unified voice about technology's strategic importance, those transformation efforts, they'll just stall. And the CIO risks reverting back to being seen as just a functional manager. Ultimately, the CIO's place in the boardroom, their continued influence, it's measured by their ability to clearly and consistently deliver measurable business value, whether that's boosting efficiency, driving revenue growth, or mitigating significant strategic risks.
Okay, that really sets the strategic context clearly. Now let's pivot to the hard data. If someone listening wants to become that high-impact strategic leader we're talking about, what skills should they actually be prioritizing? The survey data we looked at on CIO skill importance, it feels absolutely critical here because it gives us objective proof that it's the non-technical skills that really dominate this C-suite role.
Yeah, this analysis, it's segmented skills based on the median rating of importance given by hundreds of currently practicing CIOs, and it provides a remarkably clear roadmap. The findings break down the necessary skills into three distinct clusters, and the message about where to focus your development is, well, unmistakable.
Okay, walk us through those clusters. Let's start with the absolute must-haves, the cluster 1 group, the ones with a median rating of 5 out of 5, meaning indispensable.
Right. The cluster one skills are overwhelmingly managerial, strategic, and relational. They are first, leadership teamwork, second, business communication, third, interpersonal communication, fourth, strategic IS planning, and fifth, creativity problem solving. The fact that leadership teamwork came out as the single most important skill, rated as extensively important by 40% of all respondents, that really drives home the primary expectation of the role. You are a leader first and a technologist second.
These are essentially the soft skills, aren't they?
Yeah.
The strategic mindset, the ability to collaborate effectively, and maybe most importantly, the ability to articulate a compelling vision that the whole organization can actually buy into.
Absolutely. Then we move down a notch to the cluster 2 skills. These were rated as extensive to moderate in importance with a median score of 4. And these skills are much more focused on general business management and execution. We're talking about things like organizational development, business analysis, strategic business planning as distinct from IS planning, project management, change management, and crucially, accounting and financial management.
Okay, so if cluster 1 is about the vision and the influence, then cluster 2 sounds like it's more about the nuts and bolts of execution and governance within the broader business context, knowing the finances, managing the projects.
Precisely. These skills enable the CIO to essentially speak the language of the business fluently, to link IT initiatives directly to P&L impacts, to understand the financial implications of technical decisions.
Right. Now, this brings us to what feels like the really counterintuitive finding. Where do those traditional deep IT skills, the ones that often define someone's career right up to the director level, where do they actually land in this hierarchy?
Yeah, this is the part that can be tough to hear for some folks. They fall squarely into cluster 3, which was rated as the least important quarter overall, with a median score of just 3. This cluster includes most of the purely technical skills. Things like database design and management, infrastructure management, ERP implementation and management, CRM implementation, application development.
Wait a minute. Application development,
Yeah.
database management. If those are in cluster 3, the least important cluster,
Yeah.
are we seriously saying a modern CIO doesn't need to understand core technology or keep up with technical trends? I mean, that sounds incredibly risky, especially now in the age of AI.
Okay, that's the really necessary intellectual tension we have to grapple with here. We are absolutely not saying the CIO should be technically ignorant or ignore technology trends. That would be disastrous. Rather, what the data is telling us is that these deep technical skills are foundational. They're like table stakes. They get you into the game. But they are not the differentiators for success once you reach the C-suite level. The CIO is expected to have enough technical fluency to make informed decisions, to ask intelligent questions, to challenge their technical experts appropriately, but their personal time investment, where they focus their energy, it has to shift drastically away from hands-on tech. They need to master clusters 1 and 2 leadership, strategy, communication, business acumen, and trust their teams to execute the cluster 3 technical work with excellence. If a CIO is spending significant personal time debugging code or designing database schemas, frankly, they are failing at their executive role.
It's that transition, isn't it? From being a highly skilled practitioner to being a skilled orchestrator and leader. And the data gets even more interesting, maybe even revealing, when we look at how CIOs said they actually acquired these different skills. because it exposes what looks like a massive disconnect in how we often approach career development in tech.
Yeah, the disconnect is really striking, and it holds a critical lesson for any ambitious professional listening. We asked the CIOs to rate whether they primarily acquired each skill through one, prior work experience before becoming CIO, two, formal academic training like degrees or certifications, or three, work experience after becoming CIO.
Okay, so let's focus on those most indispensable skills again, the cluster one group. Leadership, communications, strategic IS planning, problem solving. How are those primarily acquired?
Overwhelmingly, the answer was work experience, both the experience gained before becoming CIO and the experience gained while in the CIO role itself. Leadership teamwork, creativity problem solving, strategic IS planning, and those crucial business and interpersonal communication skills all were rated highly for acquisition via on-the-job learning. Basically, learning in the trenches, making operational decisions, navigating real-world challenges.
Yeah, contrast that with what many people in organizations invest heavily in. Formal academic training, degrees, MBAs, executive education programs.
Well, the data suggests that academic training did not extensively teach any skill at the level required for C-suite success, according to these CIOs. The highest median rating for skills acquired primarily through education was only a 3, indicating moderate acquisition at best. And the areas where education had the most impact, generally things like business communication and accounting financial management. Interestingly, the vast majority of the core technical skills, the cluster 3 stuff like database management and application development, they also received the lowest ratings for academic acquisition, which implies even those were primarily learned on the job too.
Wow. Okay, that is the critical insight, I think, for our listeners. While getting a technical degree or certifications absolutely gets your foot in the door, it establishes that necessary foundation. The skills that are absolutely crucial for C-suite impact the vision, the influence, the strategy. Those are truly forged in the operational fire through real-world leadership challenges and experiences.
And this has really profound practical implications for how you should think about your career development. If you're an aspiring leader listening to this, the data strongly suggests you need to proactively seek out assignments and roles that force you to develop those cluster 1 and cluster 2 skills. That means intentionally looking for opportunities to serve on steering committees, volunteering for cross-functional budgeting reviews, maybe leading politically sensitive negotiations, demanding assignments that involve significant organizational change management. You have to actively cultivate these softer strategic managerial skills on the job, because formal education, while definitely helpful, simply won't supply them at the executive level the market demands.
Okay, so we know the CIO needs to master strategy and leadership. But as you said, all that skill is kind of useless if the projects they champion end up failing. And this brings us right to that core, persistent problem in the IT world, project failure, which it seems often boils down to a failure in relationship management. We've got some pretty sobering statistics on IT project success rates, don't we?
Yeah, the statistics are frankly horrifyingly consistent over the years, and they represent this massive drag on organizational resources and trust. Historically, IT projects just suffer from alarmingly high failure rates. One major report we looked at from the Standish Group cited that nearly two-thirds, think about that, 63% of IT projects failed to meet their initial targets. Around 45% ran significantly over budget. And maybe most critically, 56% delivered less business value than was initially predicted or promised.
That is just an immense waste of capital, time, and importantly, trust between IT and the business. And scholars seem to assert that the number one culprit here isn't usually the technological complexity itself or, bad code,
Yeah.
but rather ineffective stakeholder management strategies.
Exactly. The poor project manager is often caught in what feels like an impossible task. You have different stakeholders, maybe finance wants cost control, operations wants stability, sales wants new features now, and they might hold completely opposing interests. The IT team is somehow expected to magically gain alignment among these competing factions. And when projects fail, it often leads to these unpredictable political and financial consequences, partly because every stakeholder has a slightly different definition of what success or failure even looks like.
So, to navigate this inherent conflict, maybe we need a bit of a theoretical anchor. Let's quickly frame this using the basics of stakeholder theory. How does that help us understand this challenge?
Right. Stakeholder theory essentially compels organizations and, by extension, IT leaders to recognize that they have responsibilities that go beyond just maximizing profits for shareholders. It provides the why behind dedicating so much energy to managing these relationships. Donaldson and Preston, back in '95, identified 3 essential aspects of this theory that are really helpful.
Okay, what are those 3 aspects? And how do they apply directly to a CIO's work?
So first, there's the descriptive aspect.
Right.
This is simply observing the reality on the ground, describing the collaborative, but also the competitive interests of various groups involved, stakeholders, and how the organization typically reacts to them. It's the starting point for any analysis. Who actually has power here, and what do they want? Second is the instrumental aspect. This is basically the business case for stakeholder management. It links addressing stakeholder concerns directly to improved company performance over time. So for the CIO, this means better stakeholder management should lead directly to things like smoother project funding approvals, quicker adoption rates for new technologies, less resistance.
Makes sense.
Huh.
And the third aspect, which you mentioned, is the core ethical driver.
That's the normative aspect. And this is the fundamental justification based on ethics, morality, and corporate social responsibility. It argues that stakeholders, and that includes employees, customers, suppliers, regulators, even the local community, they have a legitimate moral claim to be treated with respect and fairness by the organization. So from this perspective, effective IT management, especially stakeholder management, isn't just a political game to get projects approved. It's actually a normative ethical commitment that contributes to the long-term health, reputation, and sustainability of the entire organization.
Okay, so if we accept that framework, descriptive, instrumental, and normative, what are the actual proven emergent strategies that successful IT executives use in practice? Researchers look specifically at successful CIOs and IT directors, right? People with 10-plus years of experience, P&L responsibility, and they found 5 main themes kept coming up.
That's right. 5 key themes emerged from those interviews. Let's start with the environment they have to operate within. Theme 1 was organizational culture. The successful IT leaders really stressed that the whole nature of stakeholder engagement is completely dictated by the prevailing culture. Ideally, the culture needs to be open, collaborative, where trust is paramount. One executive gave a stark example. In a culture characterized by blame and management by fear, IT project managers would literally go into hiding when scope or budget issues cropped up. Instead of proactively engaging stakeholders to find solutions, they'd avoid them.
Which, of course, immediately guarantees project failure down the line. The conflict just festers under the surface until it blows up, probably at an executive-level meeting.
Exactly. So the CIO's job in that situation is fundamentally fixing a trust problem, not just a technical delivery problem. This theme also highlighted something interesting. In companies where technology was seen as core to the business, IT PMs were often appreciated as generators of business value. But in more market-driven or sales-driven companies, sometimes IT was treated merely as a delivery mechanism, which led to less respect and lower engagement from crucial business unit leaders.
Interesting distinction. Okay, what was the second major theme? This one related more to organizational structure.
Theme 2 was organizational maturity. How mature the organization is affects basically everything from how well IT projects align with strategy to how consistently processes are followed. In mature companies, IT projects are usually tightly coupled with clear strategic goals. Everyone understands the why. Less mature organizations, however, they really struggle with process discipline. And this is where politics often trumps process. Stakeholders in these less mature environments frequently try to bypass formal change management procedures by applying political pressure directly on IT executives, which obviously causes internal tension and mistrust within IT and with the business.
Right, so maturity provides that necessary rigor and discipline. And you mentioned earlier that education is key here for IT PM, specifically moving beyond just thinking about the old iron triangle. Can you elaborate on that for listeners who might only know the basics of project management?
Absolutely. The iron triangle, as you know, refers to those classic project management constraints: cost, schedule, and quality. For years, IT PMs were taught, essentially, pick two, the third one suffers. But this view is just way too limited for modern executive demands. Today's PMs need education that goes beyond just the technical delivery aspects. They need to fully understand benefits management and organizational value realization. Their job isn't just to manage the delivery mechanism, the project, it's to help ensure the strategic outcome is achieved. They need to be able to articulate how this project increases market share, or improves customer retention, or enables regulatory compliance, the actual business value.
Because if the project is delivered perfectly on time and on budget, but nobody uses the system, or it doesn't actually achieve the intended strategic shift, it's still fundamentally a failure from a business perspective.
Precisely. And that ability to connect project execution to strategic value realization, that's the skill gap that many CIOs identified in their project management teams.
Okay, theme 3 sounds like it might be the absolute linchpin here. Leadership.
Theme 3, leadership alignment. Yes, this was consistently cited by the executives as arguably the single most important factor for project success. If the key business leaders and the key technical leaders, essentially, the management board or executive steering committee, are not fully aligned on the project's objectives and its strategic importance, the IT project manager is handed an impossible task. When leaders fail to properly validate the business case up front, or if they don't clearly align the project goals with the overall strategic business objectives, they introduce this political ambiguity that just destroys team morale and project focus.
Yeah, I can see that. If the executive team isn't speaking with one clear voice about why this project matters and what success looks like, they're basically inviting the rest of the organization to fight turf wars over the scope and priorities.
It creates unnecessary emotions and battles, as one executive put it. Conversely, when that leadership team is aligned, when they consistently speak with a single, clear voice about the project's strategic importance, it creates a much more collaborative environment, it boosts motivation across the board, and it tends to shut down a lot of the unproductive political maneuvering.
Makes perfect sense. Now let's come back down to the team-level competencies again. Theme 4 addresses a skill gap within the project teams themselves, right?
Theme 4, competencies, specifically the soft skills gap. Yes, the CIOs confirmed what we discussed earlier. While their IT PMs generally possess the necessary technical skills, those cluster 3 abilities, they frequently lack the essential softer skills, the cluster 1 communication and interpersonal skills needed to effectively manage complex stakeholder relationships. And this often manifests as an over-reliance on formal communication methods.
What's wrong with formal communication? Don't you need status meetings and written reports?
Oh, you absolutely need formal communication. Status meetings, reports, sign-offs, they're necessary for governance and documentation. But the problem arises when that's the only mode of communication, or when it's used primarily as a weapon, especially when relationships are already strained. The successful CIOs emphasize that informal communication, the quick chat in the hallway, grabbing a coffee, providing a transparent, unscheduled update, is absolutely essential for resolving nascent issues before they escalate into formal managerial problems and political battles. Building genuine trust requires frequent, transparent, informal dialogue, which, frankly, many technically focused PMs tend to avoid because it feels less structured or controllable.
Right, it requires vulnerability and relationship building. Okay, and finally, the 5th theme. This one addresses that crucial cycle of learning and improvement, or often the lack thereof.
Theme 5, Post-Implementation Reviews, or PIRs. This theme was consistently identified as being neglected across many organizations. Often the excuses were a lack of time, or sometimes a more concerning unwillingness to expose organizational failings or project shortcomings. However, these PIRs are absolutely crucial. They're essential for achieving a common understanding of how the project actually went, for ensuring the project did realize the planned business benefits, Theme 2 connection, and critically for facilitating continuous improvement in processes and execution for the future.
Why is that unwillingness to expose failure so particularly damaging?
Well, if you consistently skip the PIR, you guarantee that you fail to learn from mistakes, both successes and failures. And maybe just as importantly, you fail to achieve a shared consensus among stakeholders on what success even looked like for that project after the dust settles. Stakeholders, and sometimes even IT itself, might avoid rigorously measuring IT project outcomes because they fear exposing weaknesses in the initial business case, or flaws in the execution process, or maybe identifying failure points that they personally contributed to. For PIRs to actually be effective and drive improvement, that executive steering committee we talked about, Theme 3, must be absolutely committed to participating honestly, analyzing the results objectively, and then agreeing on specific, actionable improvement steps for future projects.
Right.
Without that feedback loop, organizational maturity, Theme 2, simply cannot increase. The organization is doomed to repeat the same mistakes.
Wow, the message is really powerful, isn't it? The high-impact CIO has to be this strategic business leader who actively shapes culture, masters relationship management.
Yeah.
It's a huge job, but let's make it practical. For someone who's maybe aspiring to be a CIO or perhaps just stepped into the role, how do you immediately put this people-first mindset into practice?
Yeah, that's key. We can draw some valuable insights here from veteran leaders, including someone like Gary Ridge, the former CEO of the WD-40 company. He built a remarkably successful global company based on a really positive, intentionally cultivated people-first culture. His philosophy was quite simple, actually. People, purpose, and passion, which all equates to culture plus products, which requires strategy and planning, equals a thriving company. This offers a pretty clear mental model for a technology executive who needs to lead their teams effectively through constant change and pressure.
And he outlined 4 foundational behaviors, didn't he? Things that must be practiced consistently by leaders to build that long-term foundation for trust and effectiveness.
Yes, exactly. These four feel non-negotiable for anyone leading a team, but maybe especially one under the kind of high pressure often found in IT delivery. Number one is care. Real empathy has to override ego. In an IT context, that means truly understanding the stress your team is under during a major outage or a difficult deployment and actively supporting them rather than just demanding results or assigning blame. Number two is candor. Reducing fear, creating a psychologically safe environment where people feel comfortable speaking up, even with bad news. In IT, candor is what prevents project managers from going into hiding, like we talked about, theme one. It allows people to flag scope creep or technical debt or potential risks early before they become huge problems needing formal escalation. Third is accountability, setting clear, measurable expectations, not just for tasks, but for outcomes. This connects directly back to that need for clear alignment on business value and benefits realization we discussed, theme two. And fourth is responsibility, actively showing people how they can take ownership, empowering them to solve problems within their domain, rather than constantly waiting for top-down direction or approval.
Those foundations seem absolutely essential. But as we know, the modern CIO operates in this state of almost constant turbulence, right? Uncertainty is the norm. What are some of the proven leadership lessons for navigating that perpetual uncertainty that characterizes the tech environment?
All right, the CEO you mentioned, Gary Ridge, also shared 8 specific lessons that he found guided his decision making, especially during times of crisis or significant uncertainty. Think major security breaches, unexpected market shifts, pandemics. These apply directly to IT leadership. First, don't try to control things that are beyond your reach. You can't control everything. Focus your energy instead on setting a clear direction and purpose for the team. Second, let empathy lead the way. Always remember, your team members are human beings dealing with pressures, not just resources on a project plan. Third, keep grounded and be calm. Especially during a crisis, like a system outage or a major project setback, the leader acts as the stabilizer. Your visible demeanor sets the tone for everyone else. Panic is contagious, but so is calm competence. Fourth, resist the temptation to micromanage. This is absolutely vital in complex, agile IT environments. Micromanagement crushes autonomy, slows down decision-making, and demotivates highly skilled technical professionals. Trust your people. Fifth, use your vision to rise above the fear. Constantly remind the team and also the rest of the C-suite of the larger strategic intent. Help everyone see beyond the current setback towards the bigger goal. Sixth, be crystal clear about the intent. Always communicate the why behind technical decisions, project priorities, or new mandates. Transparency fosters understanding and buy-in, ties back to candor. Sevens, practice pragmatic optimism. Acknowledge the reality of setbacks and challenges, that's the pragmatism, while steadfastly maintaining a positive outlook and direction for the future. That's the optimism. It's a crucial balance. And eighth, lead with gratitude. Consistently recognize effort and contributions, especially when the outcomes are still uncertain or the team has put in long hours. Simple appreciation goes a long way.
That whole servant leadership approach, acting more like a coach whose job is to help their people win it, feels really powerful, especially in tech. Okay, so this all kind of culminates in the most immediate tactical challenge for any new C-suite executive, especially one stepping into a tough situation like Barton did in the book. How do you build credibility quickly?
Yes, that first 90 days is critical. And that's where the concept of identifying and delivering quick wins becomes the primary initial strategy. A new CIO absolutely must identify 2 or 3 highly visible, high-impact issues that they can resolve swiftly. The criteria for choosing these are really important. They must be issues that key stakeholders care deeply about, things causing them pain, and they must be realistically solvable relatively quickly without needing massive new investments or complex, long-term strategic consensus building.
Okay, can you give us some concrete examples, like what actually constitutes a valuable quick win
Yeah.
in an IT context?
Sure, a great quick win could be stabilizing a frequently failing system that the sales team, for instance, constantly complained about, which immediately improves their daily productivity and morale. Or it could be finally delivering a relatively minor but long-awaited feature for a critical business unit, something that IT had perpetually delayed due to shifting internal priorities. Just getting it done shows responsiveness. Or maybe it's something like dramatically reducing the time it takes for a key executive reporting system to refresh each morning, freeing up valuable time for senior leaders. Visible, tangible improvements.
And the strategic value of getting these quick, visible wins on the board early.
It's immense. Mobilizing the team to achieve these quickly does several things. It builds essential credibility for the new CIO with the executive team. It starts to establish trust with frustrated stakeholders, and it demonstrates tangibly that IT can, in fact, deliver value reliably under new leadership. This initial momentum then buys the CIO the political capital, the breathing room, and the time required to start tackling the much larger, more complex challenges of long-term strategic IS planning, that cluster one skill.
Right. You earn the right to play the long game by delivering short-term value first. And once that initial credibility is established, long-term success requires constantly circling back to that theme of executive alignment, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's not a one-time fix. The final actions for sustained impact must ensure this alignment becomes permanent and systemic. Leaders must fully integrate a clear list of key IT projects directly into the overall organizational strategy documentation, making IT's contribution visible and explicit to the entire C-suite. They need to constantly communicate the rationale behind these IT investments, clearly demonstrating how they align with and enable broader business goals. And critically, that executive steering committee needs to remain fully aligned on IT project objectives throughout their life cycle, and importantly, be genuinely committed to conducting those rigorous post-implementation reviews we talked about. That commitment ensures continuous organizational learning, boosts maturity, and prevents backsliding. Hashtag outro. So today, we've really journeyed across the full spectrum of what it means to be a high-impact CIO, haven't we? From understanding the historical context of the role's evolution to digging into the specific skills needed, the stakeholder challenges, and finally, the practical leadership behaviors. And I think the major finding, the core message that comes through from all the research is pretty irrefutable. The modern CIO simply must prioritize strategic communication, driving organizational maturity, and mastering relationship management above almost everything else. That technical mastery, it's absolutely essential, but it's the required foundation, the starting point, not the end goal. Influence, diplomacy, business acumen, and strategic alignment, those are the core competencies that really define long-term success at the executive level.
Yeah, that blueprint for success, it's clear, it's practical, but it's also incredibly demanding. There's no doubt about that. So if this deep dive today sparked a new way of thinking for you about how you approach IT leadership, or maybe your own path towards the C-suite, please do pass it on to colleagues or friends who might benefit. And if you feel ready to really internalize these strategies, to lead with more intentionality and impact, definitely stay with us for the rest of this series.
So let's leave you with this final prompt to reflect on. Looking at your own career path right now, how can you adjust your development plan today to intentionally cultivate those crucial communication, influence, and strategic alignment skills? The ones that successful CIOs consistently rate as the most indispensable. Maybe think about this. What is the one specific action you will take tomorrow or this week to consciously move yourself further along the path from being primarily a manager of technology towards becoming a true leader of business transformation enabled by technology?
Remember, technology drives change, but leadership drives impact.
Keep learning, keep growing, and lead the future you want to create.